Welcome to the ADHD Women and Business Show. I'm Lana,
And I'm Becky.
and in true ADHD fashion, we're late to the party. Both of us have run successful businesses, and we're exploring how ADHD is probably our superpower. Now, we can't be the only ones on this journey, and so you are so welcome to join us as we discover more about ADHD, women, and business. So, in today's episode, we are chatting about what's normal anyway. So, Becky, what's normal anyway?
I should just remind everybody as well, we do get a bit passionate and occasionally swear. So just in case. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, what is normal anyway? Um, yeah, what is normal anyway? I don't know. The more I discover that silly things I do or the things that I felt shame about or just the weird things that I thought I did are normal for those with ADHD and sometimes for those without, by the way,
Mm.
um, the more normal I feel, actually, because I don't think ADHD is um, yes, it's a just a way that our brains work, and it's not really a disorder, which does annoy me about the name, actually. It's definitely not a disorder. And the more that I discover that so many women, in particular, the lost generation that we talked about last time, a
Mm.
little, there's so many of us who haven't been diagnosed that I think there's a huge percentage of people who have ADHD, and it's just one end of a spectrum of different ways of thinking.
I think that's a good way of thinking it.
Mm.
I really do. I really struggle with the psychiatrization, if that's a
Yes.
word,
Yes.
of it, because, like most things that are diverse and include a diversity,
Yeah.
it's just a different way of being as
Yeah.
opposed to a psychiatric condition.
Yeah.
And I guess I could go on my soapbox here from my former incarnation
Please
around,
do.
oh, well, my background was as a mental health social worker. And so,
Gosh.
of all places, that's
Mm.
one of the kind of core
Yes.
areas where you see mental illness spectrum, psychiatric
Absolutely.
diagnoses, etc., etc.
Mm.
And also, whether we like it or not, and I'm sure this is going to be hugely controversial, so feel free to come back if you are feeling like you need to say something, because I might be sounding offensive. But having seen acute psychiatric units and
Yeah.
being amongst staff in those units, there is an institutionalization of what is normal anyway in those
Yes.
units. So somebody who might have had their, and I always remember this, somebody had their deodorant stolen from another
Mm.
patient
Yeah.
whilst in acute psychiatric care, and the guy who'd had his deodorant stolen went up to the nurse's station and said, and quite rightly was upset and distressed,
Yeah.
because he was trying to, he wanted his deodorant and it was
Yes.
his and somebody had stolen it, and pretty much was told, if you don't behave, then we've got plenty of drugs that will help subdue you.
Oh
Now,
my
I'm using
goodness.
that as an
Yeah.
illustration, which, yes, did happen, and yes, we're talking
Mm.
about 25, 30 years ago. But the danger, I feel, is the moment something is labeled.
Yeah.
Yes, it can have very positive connotations, but equally it can also be used in a quite detrimental and demoralizing and destructive way.
Yeah.
So I'm always careful for my own way of being to choose to accept, if you like, which label I feel appropriately suits my circumstance,
Yes.
as
I hear
opposed to
you.
I
I
am
hear
that
you.
label. Does that
Yes.
make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm I don't mind certain labels for myself, but um I am me. I am Becky. I am a unique human being who happens to have experienced certain things. Um, and so I am completely normal given those things, rather than yeah, rather than I'm not my ADHD. I'm not my complex PTSD. Actually, I'm not my this. I'm not my that. I am me, and I happen to
Yeah,
have those things going on too.
yeah.
But they're not. I don't know. This whole thing. I think I said last time about had I been diagnosed 10 years ago, I'd have felt very different about it, and I certainly would have felt like it was a really negative label about me. And now I don't feel like it's a negative thing at all. So um, I'm quite excited to discover more about myself the more I dive into it.
Do you feel that's because as a community or as society, we have become more open to the kinds of knowledge around,
Mm,
okay, there's a big argument that in order for it to be labeled, it has to be diagnosed, and so therefore
yeah,
there needs to be some diagnostic sort of
yeah,
experience to recognize what's classed as not normal. I'm putting my fingers up as
yeah.
inverted
No, I
commas
know,
here.
I know. Yeah,
So um yeah, I'm not quite sure where I was going with that. My head's kind of now three questions ahead,
yes,
but
which
I'm
is
hoping
which
you
again
remembered
is
what I
perfectly
asked.
normal.
I'm hoping you remember what I asked originally, and we'll just, very gracefully and smoothly,
Yeah.
like a swan, swim into that answer.
Yes, yeah. Uh, I I think we are all normal given what's going on for us and given what we've experienced. And actually, if you can go into exploring ADHD, building your business, failing in business, restarting, pivoting, doing whatever. Actually, if you can go into all of those things, understanding that it's perfectly normal to feel that stuff and to do that stuff and for some of those things to happen, it doesn't necessarily mean it happens to everyone or everyone feels that way, but it's perfectly normal too. I had the most amazing experience with a coach called Sherry Teagman. Actually, she talks about the fact that she doesn't like chit chat. She can't do surface level conversations. That she has to go deep, or it's not worth having a conversation. And I spent a lot of my life feeling like I wasn't normal because I couldn't fit in with groups, mainly of women, because I'm a woman. I hang out with women, um, mainly women who were talking about frippery stuff that just, I can't do it. But give me a serious conversation or a deep conversation or one that's multi layered. I love it, but I can't start casual conversations with people. I just struggle with that whole I don't want to talk about the TV, even if I've loved a TV program and completely geeked out about it. I probably don't want to talk about it particularly unless it's a subtlety around somebody's behavior and then I'll happily. I don't know whether that's answered your question at all, Lana, but
Well,
yeah.
Becky, given that I couldn't
Mm,
remember what the question
yeah.
was to start with, because I'd already gone three steps ahead, I still feel this is so valuable, because you're describing
Mm,
me
yeah.
in your recollection of this,
Yeah.
and I think that's really interesting, and I'd be interested to hear from those of you that are out there listening, does this resonate with you? Is this something that can you sit and talk about the ins and outs? I was going to say of a CA, but I won't. But the ins and outs of, I don't know, one of the soaps, for example. I can't.
No.
It drives me insane
Yeah.
because I don't want to waste my time on that, because for
Yeah.
me, it isn't important enough.
Yeah.
So I totally resonate with what you said there, Becky, around this feeling. It's not even about my time is valuable. We all have valuable time. We've all got the
Yes.
same amount of hours in the day. But it's almost like, do I want quality over quantity? And like you, I cringe at the thought of having to go into, groups of people where a lot of the kickstart of conversations is the sort of pleasantries that I find really difficult to navigate, really tough. Those sort of sociabilities. Yes, I have acquired some skills, but I've had to learn that. It hasn't been a natural thing.
Yeah.
So how do you determine who you kind of feel aligned with to go deep, and know that that is the person that you could actually spend a lot of time with, because you're able to have those kind of deeper or multi-layered conversations, compared to somebody who you feel lovely person, but I can't get into that kind of conversation with? How do you determine that, Becky?
One of the ways I do it in business in particular, actually, is when I've been networking with people, you're always encouraged then to get to know people better. And sometimes you can tell if you're in the room with someone exactly what type of person they might be anyway. And sometimes there's still really good connections, collaborations, opportunities with that person. But I limit my one-to-one conversations that I have on Zoom to 30 minutes to start with, so that you can get a lot talked about in 30 minutes, number one. But also, if that person really resonates, then we get together again at some point, and it doesn't have to be quick. I mean, the first time we met, oh gosh, and I've learned that this is an ADHD trait as well, Lana, so I do apologize, because we met forever ago once, and then we didn't see each other again for a year, and I'd forgotten we'd met, because and thankfully we're still friends and that's fine, but I'd forgotten we'd met, and
None offense taken.
but we'd had a good conversation. There's no doubt about it. The more I get to know you, the more I know that we'd had a good conversation, but I'd still forgotten the good one, so let alone a bad conversation. So I think what comes around naturally comes around, and that I'm learning to spend less time with people who don't resonate. And by the way, if you've ever had a half-hour catch up with me, that doesn't mean I don't resonate with you. It means that I am careful about my time networking, because I need to do the real work in my business as well. And I can always catch up again later and get deeper with people. But I don't know. I struggle to start conversations with people. So actually, the people who are all frippery just don't gravitate to me, is really where it's at.
Yeah, and I do wonder, and apologies if you heard some knocking going on there. That was one of my dogs deciding that it needed to have scratch its ear. So we probably got a little bit of reverb off the radiator. But that really resonated with me, with what you said there around, also, there is an energy thing, without going into woo-woo territory, which I think might be a great topic at some point. Because I do think we do have higher levels of ESP and perception, and almost, I hasten to say the word psychic, but in the sense of we're very attuned to reading people very quickly, whether that's an ADHD trait
learning
or
it's
not.
called highly sensitive people. I'm learning it's a highly sensitive trait, where your
Cool.
sort of antenna is almost
It's out.
reading
Yeah.
trying to read the pulses almost. It's yeah, anyway, sorry, carry
Yeah,
on. But yes.
but it, you know, it
Mm,
comes back to that thing of that normal is a range. It's, and
yes.
it's who, for me,
Yeah.
it feels like, you know, my normal might be somebody's abnormal, and
Yes.
it could be somebody else's just plain weird, you
Mm,
know.
mm,
But it's almost like there is an energetic connection as
yeah.
well, that, you know, I do wonder, you know, I'm older now, much older, so I don't tolerate anymore the
Yes.
polite behavior
Yes.
of
Yes.
smiling and nodding
Yeah.
and thinking, oh God, how do I get out of this? Not because the other person wasn't charming, but I
Mm,
just cannot cope
yeah.
myself with the frippery,
Yeah.
if you like, or the frivolity. Not the
Yeah.
frivolity, I
No,
mean, you know.
it's just so surface level for me. It
Mm,
doesn't go, doesn't hit anything. It doesn't serve me. And no, actually, it would have served me plenty of times in the past when I've been trying to get to know people and trying
mm,
to get to know a group of people, and felt very outside of that group and very not part of it, not the cool kid, not
mm,
the, it still happens now. Actually, I was a part of a mastermind a year ago, and I still see people from that mastermind fairly regularly in group settings, and I'm not really the one who everyone goes, come, come, come. They're like, oh hi, and then we get in this group, and then I'm awkward, like, because I'm just
yeah.
not having the same conversations as them, and
Mm,
just starting to realize it's okay. It's just me and what I want out of conversations, and I've met a few wonderful people in that group too, where we sit one to one and have really deep conversations. So yeah.
yeah, yeah. But I
Mm.
think I would say that that is a superpower, because I feel
Yes,
actually, weirdly,
yes.
although we may have felt quite ostracized
Mm.
in childhood, not being part of the gang or in the
Yes.
group, I feel that often we're able to spot dynamics in teams very
Mm.
easily. So we
Yeah.
both run our own businesses, and apart from, you know, me, I am my business at the moment. I do, and very grateful
Yep.
for a couple of outsourcers that
Yeah.
support, but they're not team, you know,
Yeah.
like you would see in perhaps larger
Yeah. Sort of dynamics in
dynamic. Yeah,
businesses and stuff. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And there is something about that kind of whole being able to view what's going
Mm.
on with other team members,
Yeah.
because you have that ability, and you have kind of almost embraced and learnt that from childhood, to be the one that's not in the in crowd, but you can see what's going on. You can see the
Yes.
dynamics, you can see the patterns that, and the behaviors, and actually there is a power in recognizing the ability for a team to gel, for the ability for a
Mm.
team to perform. So I
Yes.
do feel that we might not sit in the usual normal box, but what we can
We're
bring to
still
the
normal.
table,
Yeah.
we're still normal in
Yeah.
that kind of larger
Yeah.
spectrum, and
Yes.
we can bring specific knowledge to
Yeah.
certain places that might just not have seen it at
Mm.
all.
I have found, and it's really interesting that you say about that positive of being able to read the room. And in my experience, I think I was so tied up with what people thought about me, where I stood, and not feeling good enough, and not, feeling quite broken from my childhood and various other things like that, that actually, although I've always been able to read the room, it's almost been out of fear. So it's been out of like, is there any danger here? Do I need to react, protect, so I've managed, a reasonable sized team of back in the day, in I'm a corporate escapee. Woo. So but back in the day, 13 people across 3 sites. And I know that I was not great at putting those connections together, because I was more worried about what people thought about me than about really pulling everyone together as a team. I think I'd be much better at it now, and I don't want to do it now, but I think I would be much better at it now, because it's not about me anymore. I'm okay with who I am. And I'm still learning more about who I am, but I'm all right. But there was a lot of fear around, around that feeling of not feeling normal and not fitting in and being on the outside.
Yeah. Yeah. And without wanting to sound falsely positive or diminish, because that is a big experience of feeling
Yeah,
kind of alone,
yeah, yeah,
really,
yeah.
and still having to show up and still
Mm,
stand feeling very alone.
yeah,
But I do wonder the level of self-sufficiency, and I know that's something that we want to explore a bit
yes,
further in future
yeah,
episode. How, yes, hypervigilance can come from trauma,
yeah, yeah.
and there's no doubt about that. But
Mm,
also, how can it be repurposed into that way of, self-sufficiency,
mm,
independence,
mm.
without isolation, and being able to know when you can tap back into the right people in your
Yes,
community, as opposed to the superficial, the knowing you're not
yeah,
going to fit.
yes,
And like you say, I think with the becoming older, becoming more exposed, learning to work through our
mm,
feelings, a lot of reflection and deep
yeah,
thought around us, uh, me as an
yeah,
individual,
yeah,
my interaction with
yeah,
other people and the environment that I'm in, and what works for me. And that takes a lot of courage, and
yeah,
also that ability to step forward, because each of us could have just shriveled into a little corner and thought, oh
yeah,
God, the world doesn't like me. I don't like the
yeah,
world. I'll just sit in my little spot and
yeah,
just stay quiet and invisible and
mm,
do nothing and just be a victim of that
yeah,
circumstance. It takes courage to sit with oneself and think, okay, well, yeah, as much as I'd like to fit in, I'm just not. I'm not a
yeah,
fitting in type
yes,
person.
yes,
And that's okay,
yeah,
because I may not be able to fit in like others, but there
yeah,
are certain things I can bring to the table
mm,
that are insightful and useful and
yeah,
helpful, and I can feel comfortable in my own skin. And
yes.
that's good enough. That's more than good enough.
And I do agree with you. It is a balance, because actually what's negative in one way is definitely a positive in the other. And actually, when we can hone those those feelings and skills into the positive, we're amazing at that. And that there's a quote around belonging, and belonging isn't fitting in. It's, and I've forgotten the other bit, but it's about knowing yourself. It's about being comfortable with who you are. It's about understanding who you are, and that's really what the premise of this podcast is about, isn't it?
Mm,
Actually, it's just about understanding that what we go through is normal,
mm,
and we can thrive and flourish even with some of these feelings going on. Now, I have to
yeah.
admit, I didn't set the timer for this conversation. And it feels like that might be a good place to stop.
Mm,
Otherwise, we could continue very much so. I don't know what you think,
mm.
Lana.
Absolutely. And maybe this is something that, you know, we pick up at another time, because
Yeah,
like you say, I
yeah,
think we do often have very multi-layered types of
yes,
conversations.
yes.
And knowing the way I know you, and what I love about doing this with you, is the tangents that we can just go off on,
I know, it's going to be
which is just,
amazing.
I know, it's just so much fun. I guess my question to those listening, are you
Mm,
listening? Is this something that you've struggled with? Have you always felt out of place? Have you
mm.
Have you often been labeled as not normal? Or perhaps you have thought,
Yes.
oh, I was going to use a swear word then, but fuck it. Do
Yeah.
I have to be normal? Compared to whose gradients, whose
Yes.
measurements, or am I
Yeah.
happy being me in my little world of, you
Yeah.
know, Lanaville or
Yes.
Sarahville or Genevieveville, whatever that is, and that those worlds happily collide with the
Yeah.
right people at
Yeah.
the right time and who resonate with you.
Yes,
Let's
because that
know.
that belonging and that normal actually comes from, these conversations are helping us. We've talked about that already. And it's like, I really hope that somebody listening in, any of you are listening and are also going, oh my God, okay, I'm not alone in those feelings actually. And when you find people and you start being open about who you are and what's really going on, then other people who feel similarly come towards you in a very different way than when you're trying to put that persona on, I suppose. So yeah.
Yeah, and I guess as well, I mean, we've talked about,
Mm,
do we need to bring in an expert or are we
yeah.
experts of our own experiences?
Yeah.
And I feel in this particular situation, I'm sure experts will have a view, and it's always great to take on their knowledge and wisdom. But at the end of the
Yeah.
day, it's also discerning, how does it feel for you? Does that feel
Yes.
right? Does that
Yes.
sit well with
Yeah.
you? And does it move you forward? So, yeah, great conversation, Becky.
Oh,
Really
thank you,
enjoyed
Lana. It's
it.
been brilliant. Thanks so much. We should say
So,
goodbye, shouldn't we?
we should. There was me taking a breath, thinking, oh, what do we do now? You can tell it's only my
But
second ever podcast for a long, long time. So, yeah, thank you, Becky.
thank you, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Yes, absolutely. Take care and enjoy life in your normal.
Absolutely.